My name is Don Wallace, and I'm the luckiest guy in the world. There's several reasons for that. I live to be 81 and a half years old. I've been retired 23 years. Most people retire and die. And I got to make a living doing what I like to do. The outdoor movement was really coming on strong. There were 2 or 3 outdoor shows in the country, and I wanted to be one of them. I wanted to be a new outdoor show guy with WKY. Nobody was doing them over here, of course. And so in 1961, I started writing memos to the management at Channel 4. Norman Bagwell and Lee Smith and Joe Jerkins and all the big high poo-poos. I wrote memos outlining how important the outdoors was and how many licenses were sold and how much equipment was bought, and any and every way that I could to get them to let me have an outdoor show on the air. And this went on for 4 years, 4 long years. And finally, Joe Jerkins, who was the program director at the time, finally, he had a 15-minute hole on weekends, Saturday or Sunday. I think the name of the magazine or the booklet was Changing Times. It was, I believe, a magazine that they advertised for 15 minutes. And he had to fill that 15-minute hole with something. So he gave me a shot. And I started out with a wind-up Bell and Howell camera, 16 millimeter, that the news department was going to trade in. They were going to trade it for a newer, bigger, better model. They were going to get $25 for it. So I bought it from the news department for 25 bucks, and it had one wide-angle lens on it. So I shot my own film and edited my own film. Actually, I ended up doing, I would film, edit, produce, sell, host, syndicate, bill, collect. It was a long, long road, but in the beginning, there was no syndication with that 15-minute hole, and you never knew whether I was going to be on Saturday or Sunday or when, you know. So they just dropped me in whenever they could. But I got an instant response from the public, and this went on for 6 years as a 15-minute drop-in show on the weekends. And I got a good response from the public, and the station could see that, although they probably wouldn't admit it. But I wanted to go full-time, and I was trying to do disc jockey work 6 days a week, plus produce this show, edit the film, put it on the air, and do a couple of teen hops a week. So I forgot to mention a moment ago that I figured out over a 16-year period I did over 2,000 teen hops, which was quite a bit. So I was carrying a pretty big load, and I wanted to get rid of some of it and do what I really enjoyed doing, although I enjoyed that. So I started trying over a 6-year period to get my show on the air as a full-time half-hour show a week and produce it myself and leave everything else behind. Well, it didn't happen, but finally did after 6 years. Don Webb, who was one of the salespeople, one of the key salespeople at the station, said, "Don't give it up." I was so discouraged so many times that I was about ready to give it up. And he said, "Don't give it up. Make them take it away from you." And I had a few supporters among the department heads and all. So my big break came when Marcus Welby, MD, was the #1 show in the country. I was in the men's room one day in the fall when they were getting ready to have the new season's programming. I was in the men's room standing at the urinal next to Nick Panis, who was the national sales manager. And I said, Nick, what's wrong? You look kind of disturbed. You look kind of bad. And he said, oh, NBC is not even going to program against the second half of Marcus Welby, MD, because it's such a hot show and it has so many ratings. So he said, I don't know what we're going to put in there. I said, put me in. I can do it. Send me in, coach. I can handle it. I can beat the second half of Marcus Welby, MD. They didn't think any stations could actually beat the second half, which was the climax of the program. And he said, well, that's an idea. So he talked with Norman Bagwell and Lee Allen Smith and Joe Jerkins and the salespeople and everybody, the local sales and all that. So negotiations started, and they did put me in during the second half of Marcus Welby, MD, on Sunday night from 9:30 until 10. As it turned out, I did not beat the second half of Marcus Welby, MD, but I was a strong second, and that impressed the management, and they kept me on. My career actually lasted for 23 years, which is not bad according to TV standards. 23 years from the time I started until the time I retired, January 1st, 1989. And it was a good career, and I enjoyed it very much. I figured up one time I had shot myself, and I later discarded that Bell & Howell camera, and I got a Canon Scoopy camera with a zoom lens. Boy, I was so proud of that. And everywhere I'd go to shoot films, why whoever was fishing with me or hunting with me, why they'd get a 5-minute course in photography with that thing before we started, so I could hand the camera to them. Later, my wife Pat took on that obligation with me. We traveled together and shot a lot of films, a lot of shows together. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it very much. And in 1975, I believe it was, I syndicated my show in the Dallas market on one of Mr. Gaylord's stations, KTVT, Channel 11. Now, KTVT was it was an independent station, but it had a huge following on cable. It was on cable systems in parts of 5 states. They watched me in Shreveport, they watched me in Austin, they watched me in lots of places, New Mexico, a lot of places in parts of 5 states. So I got a big following down there. What I did was I bought the time. I actually bought the time myself, and then sold commercials on it. During that time period, my mail averaged 500 letters a week. My mail count was the highest of anybody on the station during that time period, and it may have been because they wanted to win a prize when I would put the mail in the old Foreman Scotty hopper and turn it around and draw the lucky names out. So that may be why they sent me so many letters. But I got a lot of letters, and I had the privilege and pleasure of shooting film with a lot of dignitaries, sports figures, and as well as political people at the Grand National Quail Hunt, and Hollywood and TV celebrities, the $6 Million Man, Lee Majors, among others. And it was quite an interesting experience, and I wouldn't have missed it. Some people were fun to fish with and work with, and some were not. I syndicated my show in the Tulsa market from time to time. I'd buy time there, and I syndicated it in Amarillo and in Little Rock, Arkansas, and any number of areas around the southwestern United States. I learned one thing though. The people who watched me were Channel 4 was trying to get the audience of men, women, and children, everybody. Well, today there's a lot of those outdoor shows. They're everywhere. And I think I was, at the best of my knowledge, I was 4th or 5th, maybe 6th in the country to have an outdoor show. And I was, to a certain extent, a pioneer. I like to shoot all kinds of fishing and hunting films in my show. And I never did really fake any shots. Once in a while a fish would hit and whoever was with me would get it in too fast. I'd say re-release it, and they'd re-release it, and they would then I would film it, you know, coming in. And most of the time it stayed pretty lively. But I didn't like fake shots. That was not one of the things I like to do. I started to talk about deer hunting and hunting shows. I had to be very careful. Women and children don't want to see Bambi harvested. I found out the hard way one time when I had what I thought was one of the greatest shows that I ever had on deer hunting. Well, I found out, and I ran it during rating period, and I found out that it wasn't. It was one of the worst ratings I ever had. So that was the end of deer hunting for me. I did not do any more deer hunting. I remember one time when I had a squirrel hunting show down in southeastern Oklahoma around Broken Bow, and I was hunting squirrels down there with a couple of local fellas, and we had dogs that would go up and stand up and bark on the tree, put their paws on the tree. When there was a squirrel in that tree, and you couldn't even see it, but you could move around to the other side and see the squirrel. But anyway, we harvested a number of squirrels down there, and there's plenty of squirrels in those piney woods down there in southeastern Oklahoma. And Mr. Bagwell, the general manager of radio and television, got a call from a lady in Nichols Hills who said, "Mr. Bagwell, she called me first. She said, I'm going to have your job. You kill those squirrels." I have little squirrels in my yard, and I feed them, and I could not reason with her, and she was quite elderly like I am now. And she said, "I know Norman Bagwell personally, and I'm going to have your job." So she did call him and try to get my job, but fortunately I was able to keep the job. Actually, I was part of the news department, and my immediate supervisor there was Bob Berry Sr. He was my boss. Of course, Ernie Schultz was my boss too, and others. I had a number of bosses, but my main boss was Bob Berry Sr., and he was the best boss that I ever had in my life. I thought he was a tremendous man. He was very fair and a very congenial man, very understanding, and he even gave me a raise every now and then. I had to enlist people to help me. Brad Edwards was one. Brad would take vacation time to shoot my shows. He took vacation time, and I took him down to Mexican Bass Lakes. I took him to Mazatlan, where we fished for saltwater fish, and had a nice time, nice trip. We went to Mazatlan a couple of times, I think, and some other places in Mexico, and he loved it, obviously, or he wouldn't have taken vacation time to do it. And in fact, I was always trying to enlist people, friends, to do a little photography work for me. Terry McGrew, a disc jockey in the early days, would come out in back of the station where there were 2 lakes, and I would have a tube, a float tube, fishing tube. I would get in it and fish and get one of the other DJs, including Terry Magoo, to shoot some film of me so that I could use that film on my show, on my early show. Another fellow that I used to get to go with me who enjoyed going, and we had a lot of good times together, with Ken Root, the assistant farm director. And Ken always used to say, you know, the hardest thing about the Don Wallace Wildlife Show is trying to pour the beer in those Dr. Pepper cans, which was a funny little thing. But Ken and I had a good time, and we shot a lot of shows together, and we went. I took Ken clear up to the Yukon territory, and over glaciers, way up north, and I didn't really enjoy going quite that far, but I did go to a lot of places. And Pat and I went to Puerto Rico. We liked Puerto Rico. I beg your pardon, not Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, because of the tarpon fishing there. Another of the interesting trips that I made was with Abe Lemons and Jim Jones of Broken Bow, Oklahoma, who was a coach and a school teacher, and he was a guide during the summer months on those rivers down there, the Little River and the Mountain Fork River and the Cossatot River just across the border in Arkansas. I got Abe Lemons to go on a trip one time down there. We floated the river. Abe just loved it. He liked to fish. And we were floating down the river, and we had just put in, and he was kind of mumbling something. I said, "What'd you say, Abe?" He said, "Oh, I said that was with Oklahoma City University as a coach for 12 years, and when I left, they didn't even send me a postcard." Another interesting thing that I did was the Grand National Quail Hunt. I think I first went there in 1972, and they had a hard time getting me up there because I didn't think it would be that interesting. But when I went, why, they couldn't keep me away. I loved it because I got to shoot film of so many people. Lee Majors, the $6 Million Man, was one of them, and he always liked to invite Larry Zonka up there, and shot pictures of them dragging around in the field the day after some important party that night before, and that was interesting. And of course, he later became rather infamous when he harvested a deer out of season when he was hunting for quail. One of the fellows that helped me shoot a lot of film was Gene Schaus, who is a photographer and has Moose Productions. One time I took he and Pete Richmond to Lake Guerrero in Mexico, about 200 miles south of the border. And I said, now, Gene was sitting in the back of the boat, and I said, now, as we move along this bank here, angle your cast to where it kind of angles forward. Don't cast the back of the boat, because if you cast the back of the boat out and you get hung up, I'll have to circle clear around and pick you up. And besides, you probably won't catch any fish because we've been over that spot. Well, what happened? He cast to the back of the boat and caught a big bass. And he never let me live that down. Some other people that I've had fish with me, we've had some real interesting times. Bob Lilly was one of them. Bob Lilly married an Oklahoma City girl named Ann Threlkeld, Dr. Threlkeld's daughter. And I literally took them to Canada, to Sportsman's Lodge, on their honeymoon. They went up there and had a real good time, caught a lot of fish, and we enjoyed it. I managed to come up with a charter service who furnished the pilot and furnished the plane and half for the promotion, and we had a real good time. Then later, I arranged a trip with Bob Lilly and his father-in-law, Dr. Threlkeld, to Lake Guerrero, and we had an interesting experience there. We were delayed at customs at the border, and it was getting later and later in the day, and we left. When we left, I was a little bit worried about the daylight because the landing strip outside of Lake Guerrero at Victoria, Tamaulipas, Mexico, did not have lights on it. And when we landed, the sun had set completely. All we had were the lights on the plane. And I can honestly say that I saw Bob Lilly under a little pressure, and he saw me under pressure too. He gave me a picture I'm real proud of. He said to Don Wallace, "The greatest one-man show on earth." I'll always be glad I got that and proud of that. Took Barry Switzer fishing to Canada a couple of times. He took his sons up there, and we had a good trip on both occasions, and he caught some real nice fish, big fish. Took Steve Owens to Mexico one time with Dr. Don Marsh, and the pilot was Ed Strait, and I guess to this day I think he's the best pilot in the world, because on the way out we were going to land in Los Mochis and spend the night there, but we couldn't get in because of a storm, and we hadn't gassed up at El Fuerte, Mexico, but because he was afraid of the gas. So we took it straight up. There was a storm approaching, and the ice was forming on the wings. We had to back it down. There were 10,000-foot peaks in the Sierra Madre Mountains, and we were flying. No, there were 12,000-foot peaks, and we were flying at 10,000 feet. Hadn't gassed up. We headed toward what we thought was Chihuahua. I could not even see the wingtips, and I said, "Dr. Marsh, am I as pale as you are?" And he said, "At least." We kept flying blind for 1 hour, and it was the longest hour of my life. And we finally got to where we thought was Chihuahua. He finally made radio contact with him. Airport was closed to all air traffic because of the low ceiling. And all of a sudden, the pilot saw what they call a sucker hole, a hole in the clouds. He took it straight down. By the way, on that trip to Mexico with Steve Owens, Ed Strait, the pilot, Dr. Don Marsh, and we were totally out of gas when we landed. And if we hadn't found that little sucker hole to dive through, we'd be on the side of one of the Sierra Madre Mountains. I'd mention that Ken Root went with me on a number of trips. I enjoyed fishing and filming with him. He was always good for a laugh at any time of the day or night. We made a nice fishing film up at Lake Keystone one time and took my son with me that time, and we caught, he and I both caught a lot of fish through the ice. It was one of those extreme cold winters here in Oklahoma. Made a lot of films and shows with people at the Grand National Quail Hunt, including Johnny Bench. Johnny Bench, I was a member of the Grand National Quail Hunt myself because I was invited by Governor Hall's team to be on his team, and I was on his team, and so that made me an automatic member of the Grand National Quail Club, and I was a hunter. Ken Root probably was filming me at this time. I'm not sure, I've forgotten. But I was a hunter with Johnny Bench, and of course he was young and active and energetic. Every time the dogs would go on point, he'd beat me up there, and bam, 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 he'd get the quail and move on before I could even get up there. He literally ran me to death at that quail hunt. Had a nice quail hunt with Roy Clark, the entertainer and singer and guitar player. Dub Taylor was the name of that gentleman who graduated from Classen High School here in Oklahoma City. Dub Taylor loved to quail hunt, and he and I hunted together as hunting partners one time at the Grand National Quail Hunt. And I'll never forget that commercial that he made. He was talking about paste picante sauce and said, "What? New York City?" That was a cute commercial. Worked with a lot of people over the years, and I'm grateful to every one of them for all the help they gave me. Johnny Shannon especially, he helped me learn how to edit and shoot film. I worked with Billy Nix, Nick So Billy, Mark Bowski, and of course Gene Schaus, and Pete Richmond, and Roy Ramirez, and John Eslenbaum, and just a lot of them whose names I can't remember out there. I'll never forget one time I had a show that I made at Lake Guerrero with Ron Turner. Ron Turner went with me in a motorhome down to Lake Guerrero. We drove 24 hours straight to get down there. And it was when Lake Guerrero was new and the fishing was extremely good for bass. And I caught 33 bass in 33 straight casts. I made a show on topwater. And I mentioned this on my show as a promo. I said, now, sometime this month, during rating month, of course, sometime this month, we're going to show me catching 33 bass in 33 straight casts. And I didn't tell what week it was, but I kept promoting that all month long. And when the time came, I said, I'm going to tell you where it is. It's within relatively easy driving distance. Relatively. Well, when I mentioned that it was Lake Guerrero, 200 miles south of the border, 900 and some odd miles, almost 1,000 miles from here, relatively easy driving distance. There were people that had their campers packed and their cars ready to go and their fishing tackle loaded, and there were some hard feelings about that where I was concerned, but it got me a #1 rating in this market. I even beat the Muppets, and they were hard to beat. So that was a very interesting experience that I will never forget, and a lot of the people that watched this won't forget that either. I'd like to close in saying this little thought that I've always enjoyed. And when the one great scorer comes to mark against your name, he'll write not that you won or that you lost, but how you played the game. Good luck, good hunting, and good fishing.